This lesson is going to be all about Google Scripts. So we've got our editor open, our online editor for Google Scripts. So this is by default the place to write it. And of course it's very similar to JavaScript. There's a few additional classes and methods, and then the rest of it is just plain old JavaScript. So if you're not comfortable with writing Google Scripts, because this lesson is going to be all about writing Google Scripts, you can skip to the end of it and copy and paste the source code into your own scripts editor and get that up and running. The only thing that's going to be different again is going to be that ID that we're going to be tying it to, and we're using that same ID that we used earlier in order to identify the spreadsheet. So that's the only thing that you're going to have to update within the script. And of course, you're welcome to follow along in this lesson and work with Google Scripts. And I'm going to try my best to summarize it as quickly as possible. And there is a whole world of stuff out there that you can do with Google Scripts. It's literally never ending, and there is just a ton and a ton and a ton of stuff to do. So I'm going to try to keep it as short and sweet as possible, and to try to keep it as simplified as possible for those of you that are new to Google Scripts, in order to get you started and get you to be able to follow along within getting that JSON content. So we saw earlier that we can output content from the Google Sheet or from the Google Script, but now we need to look at how we can actually get our content from the Google Sheet. So this is where we need to employ a few different methods. So we're not going to be returning back that content service anymore, so we can just comment that out, and we're going to try to do getting content to return from our spreadsheet. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to catch and we're going to grab any errors, and then those errors we're going to output into our web page. So that's what we're going to try, go through now. And first of all, let me show you how you can set up errors. So you can give it a variable error, and we're going to create this as an object. And then within the object, we can have an error. So we can have error information about the error. And this is automatically going to be returned here within the catch. So all we have to do is output that error information. And then once we have that set up, so this is just a regular object, and everything within catch, it's going to be, we want to return it back. And this works the same way as JavaScript functions. So once you hit the return, then it's going to simply output that whatever you're asking it to return. So we're going to do the creating the text output. But what we want to do is we want to turn the error into JSON format. So we can do it in a number of ways. So we'll call it JSON error. And this, if you're familiar with JavaScript, then JSON stringify is the way to turn it into a string value, because we saw over here we're returning a string value of hello world. So we've got to do the same thing whenever we're trying to output content. So we can't return an object, we have to turn it into a string. And that's how we can do it with stringify. So that's it. So we can output that error in a stringified format and simply output it into the web page. And because we are going to be connecting via our JavaScript application, let's set the meme type. And in order to set the meme type, we saw there's a number of different memes here. So there is a method in order to set meme types. And we have to just chain that together. So it's called set meme type. So there it is in the drop down. And then it's content service meme type. So it's dot. So these are all objects. So meme type. And the meme type that we're going to use is JSON. So now if there's any errors, it will output it within a JSON format. So we can go ahead and save it. There's a save button over here. There's also a debug, which is also super useful, but we're not going to have to really make use of it because we're simply outputting the content. So we don't have any parameters that we're passing in there. So even if we do that, we're not going to see any of the content that's being output. So if you want to see the dev version, we see that the script completed but didn't return anything. That's because we didn't try anything here, and we didn't throw any errors because we didn't try anything. So it didn't return any information as of yet. So let's set that up, and now let's actually connect to our sheet. So we can do variable SS. And this time, this is going to be another class within Google Sheets. So let me open this up a little bit bigger. And this time we're going to the spreadsheet classes. And by default, there's one called spreadsheet app. So that's the one that's over here. And this is the one that we need to make use of. And this actually allows us to open our app by ID. We could also open it by URL. So what happens here is we can open up our spreadsheet by the ID. So let me paste that in there. And remember those spreadsheet IDs. So this is where they come in useful, because you can copy it out here and place it in here. And now we're actually going to open up that spreadsheet object into the variable called SS. And then next we need to grab the sheet. So we've grabbed the spreadsheet, and as we saw with spreadsheets, you can have a number of sheets. So this one is called sheet 1. And there's a number of different ways to open up your spreadsheet as well. So once you've grabbed your sheet, you can get the active sheet. So if you're working within the spreadsheets and you want to run the script, whatever the active one is going to get set. And we can also get, so getting the active sheet, getting the active spreadsheet. So we can get all of that information if we want to make use of it. We can also use get sheet by name. So that's another one that we need to make use of. So there's the sheet classes, and we're going to use get sheet by name. So it should be somewhere down here. So get sheet by name. So that's always the second one. You can get a number of sheets, and notice that it is within an array format. So if we only want to return back the first one, we can do get sheets and we can return back the first one. So this is one way to return the sheets, but because we want to specify it by name in case we add additional sheets or our order changes or something happens, then we need to do it this way. So SS, and the method is get sheet. So it's get sheet by name. And then all we need to do here is we need to specify the sheet name that we want to access. And it's as easy as that to place the sheet into the object. So the next step is that we want to get some data from the sheet. So this is under range. And range is the way that we can actually look at the cells and we can manipulate the cells. And there's just really a ton of different things that you can do here. But what we want to do is we want to get a range. So when we select a range, that gives us an active area within the sheet that we want to look at. So it's kind of like going into the sheet and saying, okay, I want to look at all of these cells. So we need to specify those cells. And we'll just give it a variable name of data. So it's contained within the sheet object because we've got the spreadsheet here within SS. And then within sheet, we've got the actual sheet data. So we want to be more specific and we want to get a range. And we can see here the way that the ranges work. So it's an integer row, integer column. So we can do it by those. We can also have 4 different parameters. So we can have the integer row. So that's the starting row, starting column, how many rows we're going through and how many columns we're going through. And that's the one that we're actually going to be after. So let's update these values. So looking at our sheet, we want to start at row number 2. So let's add that in because remember we've got the headings there at the top. We also want to start at column number 1 because we're starting at column number 1. If we had some additional data in there or columns that we didn't want to make use of, unlike when we're just simply outputting all the JSON data, all the sheet information, we've got more control when we're outputting and we can select. So let's start it at number 1 and we can go the number of rows that we want to go. And this can actually be a dynamic number. So we know that we want to actually go 4 rows. So we can put a 4 in there, or if we want more flexibility, we can do sheet. And there's a built-in class that automatically grabs the last row. So it's get last row. So it will get whatever the value of the last row is, and you got to subtract 1 so that it moves it up because it will go at this one and we only want data up until here. So it's always get last row, we'll get this one, 6, but we want to get the data that's above it. So that's why we're adding in the subtract 1. And we can also specify the number of columns. So again, we could do sheet get last column. So that will give us a numeric value. Or if we want to set it, we can do it this way because we only want to get 4 columns. We want to return the data for the 4 columns. So now that we've made our selection, we have one other thing that we need to do, and we need to return our rectangular grid of our values. So we see here that there's the sheet, get active sheet, get range. So they're specifying what the range is, and there's the get values. So that was the last part of it that we need to, in order to actually retrieve back those values into the data object. So there we go. So we've got all of this information. And next, we just simply have to return it in a format that can be read. And we already saw that we do have a way of doing that. So we simply output it. We saw it within the error, and we still need to stringify it. So let's grab that and we'll stringify it, and instead we'll call it JSON data. And over here, update this to JSON data. And instead of stringifying our error message, we're going to stringify data. So there we go. So now let's go over to publish, and we can try the code out. So authorization is required. So that's one of the other things too, that in order to access sheets, you need to set the different authorization for it. So if you go to debug, it will ask you to review the permissions. And this is where you give permissions for the script to run as your Google account and access the sheet. So you have to accept the permissions. And it'll give you this warning that it's not safe, it's not been a verified one. So you could go through this warning, and down here at the bottom, you can go to the site and then simply give it permissions to access the spreadsheet. So that's all we have to do, and we can actually now go back to the deployed as a web app, and we can see that now it's actually outputting that data that's contained within the cells. So if I was to duplicate and add in another, and let me update some more information here. If I was to update my Google Sheet, we can see that my content gets output as well. So it's nice and neat. And this way, we can also test this from Postman. So now it looks pretty good, and we're ready to create a new version. And that's the thing with the Google scripts. Whenever you make an update, you've got to create a brand new version, which is actually really good because you can always revert back to earlier versions. So it keeps all the version history there, and it's a really great application. They thought of everything within this Google Scripts. So let's give it a name. So output JSON update, and we can, once again, we'll grab that URL, hit OK. And now whenever we go to the URL, we can see when it executes out, we get our JSON data. So we can update, we can get rid of these ones here that were throwing the errors. And now let's go ahead and try this in Postman. And this is usually where I try things out just to make sure things are working properly. So let's send a post. And there we go. So we're seeing that we're getting a nice, neat. So this time we don't have a whole bunch of junk in it. We've only got the relevant data. It's within an array format. So this is an array, and it's got an array within it and number of elements. So it is in an array format. It's not entirely in an object format. Of course, we could create it in an object format, but the array format works just fine. And we can loop through this data and output it within our application. So we're jumping back into that, and that's coming up in the next lesson. And again, by all means, if you're not comfortable with Google Scripts, you can just copy and paste the code into your scripts. Don't forget to change your project ID to match with whatever your sheet ID is that you're working with. And that's all you have to do. And then you have to accept permissions, publish it, and you're going to get that same output. So this one is dynamic enough. And in order to make it even more flexible, what we could do is we could do sheet get last column. And we'll just try this out just before we finish up, just to make sure everything is still coming in properly and we're getting the last columns, we're getting the last information. So now it's a little bit more dynamic. So let's update that. So now you could have multiple columns if you wanted, and it will output all of the sheet data as expected. So go ahead, try this out, or copy and paste the code in, and the next lesson we're going back into our regular editor and we're working locally again and creating an AJAX call to pull this information, to pull this data back. So that's coming up.